Hello, everyone. I'm Daniela Saioni. I am a 30-year script supervisor veteran in Toronto, Canada. I've worked now. My bio says I've worked in 11 countries, but I'm at a loss for my 11th country. I think either I'm really forgetting it or maybe I counted Newfoundland as a separate country. That's a province in Canada, but definitely I've worked in 10 countries in my career and was very strategic about it. Some of you may or may not know, I run an international script supervision training program. And right now I've got over 300 script supervisors in 14 countries who are just rocking it. What I notice about my students is that they're traveling a lot. So they'll graduate in their country and then they will get work that takes them out of the country pretty quickly or out of the province. Because like we travel not only we work in our city, we work in our province or state, and we work in other countries. And today I realized I do have a lot to say about it because especially early on in my career in the 90s, I was very strategically I really wanted to travel, and our job, our role is a key position that actually allows us to travel in certain cases, right? So I would always try to gravitate to the shows that did, and I was very strategic about it. So I'm going to talk about that today, and I'm going to talk about like the things in my kit and what I negotiate, and some examples of how my students over the years have traveled for work. I have been training people for 25 years, but last year, so I've been running a beta version of my online course for the past 18 months. And it's officially, I can officially deem it a success because what I was able to do for script supervisors in Ontario, I've been able to translate around the world now, which thrills me. So I'm shutting down the beta on January 1st. So if anyone wants to train with me at this beta price, which is like a fraction of what my regular course is going to be, I'll tell you at the end how to do that. But thank you for being here, because when I do these private Zooms, meaning like when I do these private talks, I have a number that I've done that are not on my YouTube channel. I do have a lot of free content on my YouTube channel about script supervision. If you're interested, just go to Daniela Saioni. There's my YouTube channel is about comedy writing because I train comedy writers and I am a comedy writer, script supervisors and entrepreneurs. So you'll find a mishmash, but there's some really great script supervision talks. There's even more in my private program. And I use these private Zoom talks really to develop my course. I reissue and update my course this one has been going for 18 months, but every year to 2 years, right? And we did a bunch earlier. I think Patrick was at the one that I did on working with actors. I named names, so I never issued that one on. But that's going to be a specific module in the new version, and people have the talk in the beta version. I say the old version, the beta version. Patrick says, yeah, I think you were also at my negotiating your deal one, another one I could not post on YouTube. This one is fun. This one is fun, even though I'm going to name names and name strategies and everything. I think if you're here, you're like me, you love to travel or you would like to travel. I bet there are people here who have worked in more countries than I have. Let me know if that's the case. So I was able to remember 10. I can't remember what my 11th was, so definitely 10. So the countries I have worked in are the USA. I'm based in Canada. By the way, we're all going to have different combinations of citizenships and languages. I can tell you mine. You don't have to be multilingual to travel. Of course, it helps. You don't have to have multiple citizenships to travel in our job, but of course it helps. I'm going to talk about how to get work visas. I've been permitted to work in the United States through an O1, previously through an O2 visa twice, and then through an O1 the third time. So I'll talk about work visas and what you need to get those together. So I have a Canadian citizenship and a European citizenship. I'm Italian Canadian. So I do have the benefit of those two passports. I'm like trilingual is an exaggeration because Patrick knows I can understand French. I can communicate on a very basic level in French, but I by no means consider myself a bilingual script supervisor in French. I work better in Italian. I've done a lot of work in Italian, or a fair number of work in Italian, where I can do my notes in that language. And I've worked on set in like at least 10 languages, because that's a separate topic of conversation. But the more languages you know in this job, job, obviously, the better. But listen, there are plenty of script supervisors with huge careers who have one citizenship, and that is usually the USA, and one or somewhere in Europe, and one language, which is usually English. So, but English is a very powerful language in our job because Hollywood is the most powerful employer. So that's obviously the one of the more powerful ones to have. But again, not necessarily, it's not dependent on that. It helps. Every citizenship you have, oh, look at Ryan. Yes, Ryan is a director. So he has directed in the USA, Jamaica, Barbados, Sri Lanka, Guyana, Dubai. Oh my God. South Africa, Antigua. He's fascinating. Costa Rica and Canada. I wish I could remember my 11th country. When you're in your 50s, you lose it sometimes, right? So, okay. Where do I want to start? So being an international script supervisor is a mindset, very much so. You can work your whole life and never work in a different country. You can plan strategically to work in as many countries as will take you. It is definitely a mindset. In my Director Whisperer course, there's a whole mindset I teach about being a valued member of the director's team. But there is definitely a mindset to a script supervisor who travels or wants to travel, in that we make we help the opportunities find us, and we go after those opportunities in a strategic way, so that it's not just a coincidence that we end up working in all those countries, right? So let's talk about some of that today. We have to think of ourselves, by the way, as a global profession. There's not that many of us in the world. Even though I have 300 students, there's thousands of us in the world. That's not very many when you think about it. When you think about the number of films that get made internationally across different countries, we have people here from South America, India, if they're all in attendance, but people who registered for this talk are in other countries that make a lot of films as well. It's not just what we know in our, a lot of us are in our North American or UK bubble, right? Like we have a lot of work. So we think of the world in terms of that, but it's a big wide world, making films in all different languages, in all different ways even, but we have the commonality of the majority of it is the same, right? The majority of films are shot the same way to an extent. And then there are regional and cultural variations within that are really fun to get into once you're there. So we're a global profession. And as you know, the film industry peaks and valleys. Now, lately, it's been work. And it just seems like we're just going to keep having more and more work for many years, just because of the way the world is going with streaming services and all of that, right? It seems to be it's crazy the level of work my students are finding themselves in right away. It's kind of shocking to me. And right now I'm getting the sense that the majority of the work is in the UK, and that changes all the time. Sometimes the majority of the work is in Toronto, Vancouver, New York, or Atlanta, LA, Bollywood, Nollywood. It's all of the above. There's a consistent flow in all of the above cities. And then sometimes like the focus shifts. I remember in 2003, when SARS hit Toronto and Toronto kind of died as a production center, I had a student who was like, she asked me, well, where can I go work? I have European citizenship. And I said, what languages do you speak? And she spoke Romanian and Italian. And I said, oh, can you work in Romania? Because that's where all the work is. That was the period where all the work was in Romania and Bulgaria, which happens. They have a fair number of work all the time. And she said, yeah. And so she went to Romania and worked for 2 years, built up a massive resume, massive, like just nonstop work. Because they, if you've ever worked there, I haven't worked there actually, not in Romania, but I've had students work there, and they just work. They do things it's like a factory, but the Eastern Bloc countries have a huge filmmaking tradition because Russia was like a major filmmaking center. And so of course, the Eastern Bloc countries have this very high level of expertise and a lot of equipment. And so it is and by the way, right now, one of my students in Hungary told me Hungary is beyond busy. So Budapest, if you guys are looking for a place to point your compass, Budapest, the UK, if you're able to work in those countries, or if you can find a way to work in those countries, right now they're on fire. And we have our tried and true, that cities that I named before are generally always busy, right? But, we've had times where the work was down here in Toronto. So I'm speaking from a Canadian perspective, but you can apply this to your American perspective. If it's slow in Boston, you can go out of state and work in other states quite easily without too much, you don't have to get a work visa to do that. But if you were to come up to Canada when we were having a boom, you'd have to get a visa the same way Canadians would have to get a visa to work in the US. How many of you have dual citizenships or 3 citizenships? That's a huge, huge asset for sure. I know people with 3 citizenships, or the ability to work like in Europe, US, and Canada. I mean, that's a golden ticket, but most of us will not have that. Okay. So yeah, so that was one example. And sometimes we work internationally for survival, right? It is a big survival technique. So if Toronto's overrun with work, but all the jobs are taken, I had students in past years go to Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan is no longer booming, but there was a time where Saskatchewan was quite busy because they had this incredible tax credit and they didn't have enough crew to fill the job. So I had students go there for like a year, maybe longer, build a life in like a province where it's really busy, which is totally, I think that can be very hard. So that's not sort of how I do it, but it can be a choice you make. It's a survival thing. I years ago, I shot in Ireland in the 90s. And if anyone has shot in Ireland around that time, I don't know if this has changed, but in Ireland, the union was super protectionist. So they were not like letting people in pretty easily at all. And I had a script assistant reach out to me. And we don't really have script assistants in most parts of North America yet. We're working on that. If you see my YouTube talk with Michaela Kim, we talk about how we're starting to implement that. But in the UK and Ireland and France, script assistant position is a thing. So I had someone reach out to me who had been living and working in Dublin for 8 years by that point. And she said, the union is not letting me in. So I need to know if there's anything I'm doing wrong. And can I shadow you? And I said, absolutely, you can shadow me. And by the way, if you take a job internationally, always train someone local. I know I do. Always pay it forward. And you're going to find many opportunities to do that, especially if you're working in a country where they speak another language. I had an assistant named Riju in India, in Delhi, and Riju was my translator because we were doing the film in Hindi, and I don't speak Hindi, so he was translating for me, but I was also training him at the same time so he could have a career and be a local for them there. He left script supervision, he went to Bollywood, was a script supervisor, was an AD, and then started a film festival. But I have other students in India, and there's lots of work, right? So you will find opportunities to train locals, and it's just you're paying it forward. So I should mention why I was there in the first place in Ireland, because this will happen. There were only enough crews to cover at that time maybe 3 productions in Dublin, and there were 8 productions, and the productions included Saving Private Ryan and The Boxer. So it included these 2 huge productions. We were there on a Canadian co-production shooting like these HBO specials on inventors. So we were relatively small potatoes. There were some Disney movies. So like it was full, but they had to import, at least 5 script supervisors and some of the other positions that the union couldn't fill. We'll talk about co-productions in a sec, but a lot of countries have co-production treaties, and we have one in Canada and Ireland have a co-production treaty. Now, and so I'll tell you how I landed this gig down, further down when we talk about strategy, but that's how I ended up in Ireland. And when I was told that there was someone local who had been working for 8 years, I was a little bit shocked. I'm like, you could have given her a job instead of importing a script supervisor. Anyway, so I let her shadow me, and she was also a paid script assistant on The Boxer. So she went back and forth. I never met the script supervisor on The Boxer, but she wrote to me recently, and I just loved that we shared this assistant for a period of time and had never met in 1997. Her assistant said to me, yes, I have not been able to get in the union. They're not letting anyone in. And everything she was doing was perfect. I'm like, there are no flaws in your process. Your paperwork is great. I don't know why you're not being let into the union. However, what languages do you speak and where can you work? And she told me, and she said, I speak German, and I can work in Germany. And this was EU. She could work anywhere in the EU. And she wrote to me 3 years later, and I said, well, then you should move. And she wrote to me 3 years later to tell me how happy she was that she had done that, because she'd been working nonstop in Germany. There's obviously a lot of work in Germany as well. I can't remember if she went to Berlin or somewhere else, but it was on my old email address, and I wish I still had her email address. I just remember her emails just telling me how happy she was. So sometimes you never know what you're going to find till you get there. Obviously, if you've got, I've never had kids or anything. So obviously, if you have kids and it's not, listen, I know plenty of people with kids who travel for work as well, and they make arrangements. So we can talk about that at the end too. But I wasn't that person. So for me, it's like, just go where the work is. It just seems like logical, right? And when production wants you, they will find a way, and you will have hopefully implement a strategy where production wants you, like they see you as the person for the job. So yes, that was another example, and it was for survival. I had another student who may be here today. I don't know, Rahela. Rahela is from Slovenia, and she was able to come work in Canada on a 2-year work visa. I believe it was the Commonwealth visa. We have a similar thing in Canada called the IEC, International Experience Canada. And what you should do, whatever country you're in, is check the opportunities your government has to work abroad. So if you're here as a Canadian, and we have many Canadians with us, this IEC program is unfortunately age specific. So you have to be between 18 and 35. So it's quite a young demographic. And I have many students who start this job older than that. But if you're in that 18 to 35 demographic, just know, and if you're in Canada, this program lets you work in 30 countries around the world and they take away the roadblocks. So they give you a visa, and they give you a visa faster than you would have to do it by applying on your own. Some of the countries you can work in, it's up to a year, and some of them longer, which is great. So if you're eligible for that and you want to work, like let's say in Asia, there's lots of work in Asia too. Like Hong Kong is one of the countries that that program covers all over Europe. I had a couple of students work in Greece this year because they said Greece was really busy. So I looked up Greece. We have an exchange program with Greece under that IEC for a year. So if you were in Canada and wanted to work there, obviously Greek language would be an asset. But again, I was just talking to, there's a company I worked with when I shot in Italy called Mestiere Cinema, and Mestiere is like one of the biggest production companies in Italy. And they came here to do a co-production talk, about doing more co-pros with Canada last week. And I went to the head guy is Enrico. I worked with a guy named Guido, his business partner, but I walked up to Enrico because on stage he had said, we are short of script supervisors in Italy. And I said, Enrico, I worked for Mestiere in 1998, and I say hi to Guido for me, but and he goes, oh, what'd you do? I said, I was a segretaria di edizione, which is a script supervisor. And he said, oh, and he was telling me the problem is not that they don't have good script supervisors, because they have great ones, but the problem is the films are coming from Hollywood and they need strong English speakers. So you might not be fully bilingual. Let's say if you were doing a gig in Greece, but you might understand Greek, which is a lot of Canadians, Greek Canadians do, but you have a strong grasp on English. If they were coming to do My Big Fat Greek Wedding 3 in Greece, which I heard they are, if they haven't shot already, then you could apply for that gig. And we'll talk about how to apply for that gig and all that. But so Rahela came here for 2 years. And then she went back to Slovenia and really became a director. She continued to script supervise in Slovenia, but really she's a full-fledged director now, as a lot of script supervisors do become. And then another example of, so we have an international gig list in my program. So when people graduate, we network with each other. Most of the gigs I get from producers are in Canada because they know me. Even though I am known internationally, most of the producers who know my work with my students over the years know me from Canada. But occasionally, the director whisperers, my students help each other to cover each other, which is awesome. I've been noticing the UK people doing that a lot because there's just so much work. They can't do it all, right? But so occasionally I'll get international co-production calls from people looking for bilingual students or students. So here's a crazy example. I often get a call from Cuba. So especially years ago, there's like in January, February tends to be the busy time for Cuba. So I will, and often and I think it's because I believe Canada has a co-production treaty with them, right? So it'll be a Canadian producer saying, hey, I'm shooting in Cuba. Do you have any Spanish speakers, but 1 year, and often I do have Spanish speakers in my, so very important to put it at the top of your resume, what languages you speak, what citizenships you have, because half the time the language you speak will get you work, or the citizenship you have can potentially get you work. It can outshine someone else who's competing against you, who doesn't have, who might even be local to the country, but doesn't have the same language skills, right? So this 1 year, they said, do you have anyone who speaks Spanish and Russian? Because they were doing a Spain, Canada, Russia co-production. And these things happen, like these bizarre combinations. Now we went through, I sent them everyone who spoke Spanish, and I sent them everyone who spoke Russian. I didn't have anyone who spoke both. And they said the director, and the film also has English in it. So, but it was like more of a priority that people could communicate in Spanish and Russian. I didn't have anyone that fully fit the bill, but I sent them everyone. The person they hired, it was her. I was so happy for her because it was her first sort of big international feature. She was Latina. She was Canadian Latina who understood a tiny bit of Russian, but it wasn't like she couldn't call herself bilingual. She said it went great, but that's who they ended up going with. So sometimes, and listen, the amount of times I get requests for Arabic speakers, for people who speak Farsi, for people who speak Mandarin. If you have any of these languages, these are requests I get all the time. And I might have 1 or 2 students that speak those languages. So be in touch with me because I do get those kinds of, but any, you wouldn't believe, like, you might think, oh, no one speaks my language, but I mean, you don't think that because you speak your language, but you might think Hollywood doesn't need me for that. But there are co-productions, and there are, location shoots. So a Hollywood movie might be shooting in Thailand. I have a Thai student who told me the name of, Tagalog, right? So if you speak Tagalog and you're in Thailand, and even though the movie's in English, it's a huge asset for you to be able to join that movie because you can communicate with the local crew. So start thinking about like along those lines. I've seen a lot of people get work that way. Ryan says I speak Caribbean as well. And as you know, Ryan, we do a ton of co-production with definitely with Trinidad, right? We do a fair bit with Trinidad. I have students in Barbados who are local to Barbados, who flew up when I was not doing my course online, but yes. And of course, there is a ton of work in the DR, which is one of the countries I worked in. The Dominican Republic is one of my countries that I have worked in. And I don't know if Letty's here, but I was able to hire Letty as my second unit person. And now she's just rocking her career in the DR. But yeah, always pay it forward. Tons of work in the DR, by the way, because there's a massive studio there that Pinewood built with a water tank. And we were shooting X3, a big action movie. Terrible, right? Like terrible. Sorry. I sometimes say that about movies I worked on, but it was crazy. There's like a sequence where, Vin Diesel is riding a motorcycle across the water and then under the water. It's crazy. But we shot it at that water tank. So yeah, sometimes people will have a lot of production work because of the conditions of the country. And now, for those who don't know, the Caribbean islands are trying to organize and trying to unionize. Hopefully they do, because right now there's a lot of inconsistency. That's a whole other talk. I think we talked about that in the negotiating your deal talk. Anyway, those are just some examples of ways my students have got on. Sometimes it's a matter of survival. You need work, and all the work is in Romania. Sometimes it's a matter of, I really want to use my French, and I've worked in France, and France and the UK have different paperwork systems and different, I teach both paperwork systems because, by the way, in Canada, we have done a lot of co-production with the UK. Our whole system of filmmaking, everything that was passed down through the generations before the Americans came and shot in Canada and sort of took us over on a film production level. All that we were trained by the Brits. So we have to, as Canadians, know both systems of paperwork, although it's safe to say that 80% of the shows that shoot here do use the American system of paperwork and the American system of slating. But, we have to be international script supervisors, depending on the country you land in. In India, they use the UK system as well. You want to be fluent in the paperwork and other practices. So France is a little different because our daily progress report has more things on it. I was a little bit shocked to learn when I was in France that the script supervisor, right, we do more of what we would consider an AD daily progress report the production report really in North America, which is including like crew injuries, any production delays, why did they happen, right? Like we're writing that down in France. So I was like shocked when a grip walked up to me and he said, I hurt my terrible French accent, Patrick, I hurt my finger, he said. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And he goes, no, write it down in the report. And I was like, what? And so I had to learn that the reports, the system of what we include in that daily production report is different in France. Now, for those who are on Scripty, I am not on Scripty. I use a digital system that is my own, that is very fluid and flexible. But on Scripty, they do have a special daily progress report for France that includes all that stuff. So that's great. But you would have to learn the kind of things that you would report in certain regions. But France stands out. And of course, the UK system, you know, it's funny when you have editors in LA, most of the shows I might work on will have editors in LA. They don't even know another system of paperwork and slating exists. And it's so funny how like, LA centric they can be, or Hollywood centric. There's a whole wide world out there that uses different systems. So that always makes me laugh when an editor goes, what? There's another system of slating? Because I like both for different reasons. I happen to really like the UK system of slating, but of course I will always adapt to what the editor wants. I've certainly been on Hollywood movies where we had the editor in the UK, which I loved, by the way. Okay, so doing a time check. Wow. Okay, so so those are some of the examples, but in terms of the mindset, think about the citizenships you have or that you want to get. Think about the languages you speak and start to go after the productions that will get you there. So look at the co-production treaties you have. So what I used to do in the 90s is actually applicable today, though you wouldn't do it in the same way. In the 90s, where I did like 8 of the countries that I worked in were really in the 90s, because I was really chasing those. I would read the trades. So in Canada, that's playback. In Hollywood, that's variety. You know, we have an international version of that now called IMDb Pro, and I'll explain that in a sec, but I would read the trades and I would see who got financing to do a co-production. So in one case, it was Divine Entertainment. So Divine Entertainment was doing a series for HBO called The Inventor Specials, and they were taking a Canadian crew through Europe. I think Celine, you might have worked on that, right? You might have worked on with David, but I worked specifically on 4 of those specials. So we shot 2 in Italy and 2 in Ireland. So I read that and I typed out a fax. I'm so old. I typed out a fax. Oh, Ryan says Jonestown is supposed to be shot in Guyana soon. Yes, Jonestown. Oh my God, Ryan, if you can be there, even if you can shoot B-roll for them, like, you know, as a document, because you're a documentarian, there's so many ins you have. You could be the local script supervisor who communicates with the Guyanese crew, because they're going to bring their Hollywood script supervisor, blah, blah, blah. But there's so many ins you have, Ryan, with all your skill sets, right? Actor, right? Of course. Yes. And Ryan, you do so many things. I forget. Yes. Actor and 16 other roles. Yes. By the way, another way in is translator. So I mentioned Riju, who was my translator in Delhi, and I mentioned off this talk to Patrick, but Charles Jodouin-Keaton, who is like a huge script supervisor in Paris. I first met him in Montreal, and Charles was the director was from France. We were shooting a movie in English. It was a comedy, and he needed a director's assistant who was completely bilingual. So that's how I met Charles. And Charles was so interested in what I was doing. He had no idea what script supervisors did. So I trained him right there on set, and he loved it. And I said, Charles, what is it that you would like to do? What is your dream? And he said, my dream is to move to Paris and be a script supervisor now. And I was like, then move to Paris. And guess what he did? Anyway, that's another example. The other way is to make yourself indispensable to a director, and they will take you everywhere. But you don't want to, I mean, that takes a while. That takes a few years sometimes. And sometimes some of you here have already experienced that. And that is always a great feeling when a director is like, yeah, I'm shooting in Vietnam and I can't do the movie without you, right? We love that feeling, but that's more rare and something to work towards, but it's not like a strategy. So I at the time read that Divine was doing all these movies, and I typed out a cover letter and faxed it, because I'm old, to David Divine himself, the producer director, and said, hi, I have my European citizenship, which by the way didn't matter because it was a when it's a co-production with your country, as long as you have the citizenship of one of the countries in the co-production, you don't have to have the citizenship of both of the countries, because they get credits and labor tax credits for depending on your role and your nationality. So that didn't matter. But what mattered to him was, he said, oh, your letter was really well written and you spoke Italian. That was a help to us, because the crew was coming from Canada and Italy, and most of the Canadians were not fluent in Italian. So he said I was hired before he met me, but he called me in for an interview and brought me to Ireland, where my Italian wasn't necessary, but it was all part of the package deal of this co-production, right? So the modern version of what I did, and I would do that very often. I would read the trades, write to producers who didn't know me, send them my resume, which was meager at the time. It's not meager now, but at the time I was a pretty new script supervisor. It was before I had done My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which was my breakthrough movie. Most of my international work was done before, and my career changed. I could have kept chasing the international stuff. I still kept doing the international stuff when there was like a big movie in Toronto that went to other continents. So like on Trader, I've shot in Morocco twice. Love shooting in Morocco. That's a place many of us have access to shoot. By the way, there's some countries where it's a lot easier. There's a lot less paperwork. So the Dominican Republic is one of them. You can buy a work visa for $10 US. So it's really, if a production is shooting wholly in the DR or partly in the DR, that's an easy country to get into. When we shot in Malta, I was there with a Canadian director. A lot of good work gets done in Malta, by the way. I was there with a Canadian director, but the film was a UK film. So it was all done on UK tax credits. So she wasn't really getting any tax credits on me. She was just one of those directors who liked to hire me. I had just worked with her in Montreal on the film I had trained Charles on. And so we got to the airport with a whole bunch of Canadian crew. She brought almost her whole Canadian crew. And I realized we didn't have work permits or anything like that. I mean, I had my European passport. They didn't care. We got to the airport. They're like, why are you here? We're here to work on a movie. Oh, great. Come on in. Some countries are like that, but you don't want to count on that. I learned that about Malta, but you don't want to count on that. You want to make sure your paperwork is in order, and you want to make sure. So at that point, I don't even know if I had my physical EU passport. I mean, it wasn't EU back then. It was 1997. Maybe it was EU already. It was just becoming EU, but I can't even remember if I had a physical Italian passport the way I do now. But either way, they hired me because of the Canadian side, right? And I was able to do 2 of the countries on the list that I mentioned. With India, it was a Canadian co-production with Deepa Mehta through Telefilm. So she had to bring a certain number of Canadian crew. With these co-productions, it's really good to really hone up on, like, to read about them, because they have to bring a certain amount of crew from one country and use in another. So, Ryan's in a sweet place for Jonestown, being, I think anyway. And so, so think about that. Read up on the trades. The modern equivalent to what I did by sending a fax, obviously, is sending an email, right? And so reading the trade, you can read the trades. You can read in Variety. Oh, they're shooting Jonestown in Guyana. Sorry, I always do that. I guess I'll get in touch with Leonardo's company, or there's 2 companies producing that, and it's MGM. What production with Deepa? Ask somebody. I worked on Earth, so she had a trilogy, Earth, Fire, and Water, and I worked on Earth. And I think Celine has worked with Deepa as well. So, but anyway, that's the one I did in Delhi that I had my assistant on. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So the modern equivalent is you can read about productions that are happening in the country you want to go to. This is one way. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of strategies. And then just write to the producer. Usually you want to write to the producer because they're going to make the final decisions about who they bring. If you have some connection, like I work with Paul Feig, I deal with Paul directly because he produces his own films. But let's say it was a director that I'd work with, like, I don't know, Laura Taruso, one of my lovely newer directors that I try to work with as much as possible. If Laura was doing a film in, I don't know, pick any country, Italy. Laura's Italian American. So let's say she was doing Italy. I would write to her producer and probably CC her and say, hey, I've worked with Laura before, and I see that you guys are shooting in Milan, and and it doesn't have to be like a country that you're a citizen. I'm a citizen of Italy. It could be just that you have that connection, whatever in you have, whether it's the language, the citizenship, or the connection to the director or the producer. go for it. Do what you got to do. The worst they can do is say no. The best thing they can do is say yes. When can you get on a plane? Right? Or they say, okay, great, we're going to apply for your O1 work visa. So I have been permitted in the United States 3 times on an O. So the first 2 times on an O2. And I'll just explain the differences for those who don't know, because I believe it's the same if you were American coming up to work in Canada, or if you're a European coming to work in Canada. It's a work visa for extraordinary aliens. So I think they got rid of the word aliens. I think Biden got rid of that, but extraordinary aliens. So non-citizens of the country who are extraordinary in their field. Now, I want to say that the first time I got an O2, O2s are easier to not be extraordinary, because an O2 is a work visa where you're attached to someone extraordinary. So what they will do for script supervisors usually is either attach you to the director or one of the stars, but they also have to be foreigners. So I'll give you an example. Pretty early in my career, in 1999, I wasn't extraordinary. I had done some big movies, but nothing huge. I did a terrible movie called Turn It Up in New York City. And to get permitted to work in New York City, where there's like a lot of script supervisors, I didn't think it would happen. But because of the nature of our job, if you start in one country and the film is continuing in another, they like to maintain the continuity. So that's a reason why they bring us. We're one of the departments that they bring. So they really wanted to bring me to New York to maintain the continuity. There's 2 things that have to happen. They have to apply for a work visa with the government, and your resume has to be approved by the local union who covers the craft. So in that case, IATSE local, oh my God, I'm blanking on the New York local 121. Anyway, the New York local would have had to look at my resume, and they would have to read the case about why I'm being brought into their jurisdiction. And I mean, it all went through, but in those cases, when it's an O2, they tied me in that case to, I can't remember. I think it might have been the director, because the director was Canadian as well. So the director was an extraordinary alien. He was directing a big feature film. It was for Madonna's company. It was a terrible film, but it was like, a big budget movie. So I was tied to Robert Atatouille, the director's O1, as an O2, as someone essential to that O1's team. The second time I was permitted in New York City was on a pilot called U.S. Attorney. It never went to series, but Mimi Leder was directing. Our lead actress, one of our lead actresses, was Rosamund Pike, who is British. I can't remember if she's British or Australian originally, but she's not American. So, and we were shooting in New York. So her O1 was tied to my O2 on that. So that's a pretty easy way. You still have to go through, by the way, all the same steps that you have to go through to get an O1. It's just harder to get approved for an O1. So what an O1 visa is when you are extraordinary. So for the veteran script supervisors among our group today, I would say anyone who's been doing it 15 years or more, if you've been doing it less time, but you have like some big credits, you might be considered for an O1 visa. And the steps to getting this visa, whether it's the US or whether it's Canada, and I'm not 100% sure in Europe because every country will have different. So I can't tell you. I just know that it's fairly easy for me to work in Europe as a citizen, but a non-resident. And I've had many Canadians working in Europe who have no European citizenship at all. So I think Europe is not as hard as Canada and the US. But what that O1 visa, and actually you need the same elements for the O2 involves, is so if you have a mindset that you want to work in one of those 2 countries, and even anywhere, you want to make sure you build up a file of this information. So you want to have a current resume, of course, with all your credits, and on that resume, the directors and producers you've worked with and all the studios you've worked for. Okay, that's a given. Then you want to have they ask for your education, and many people have gone to film school, but many people have not. But they want to make sure you have, it's the best if you have post-secondary education of any kind to add to that, but any kind of credible education you would put in that file. Then you would add any awards you won. And we're script supervisors. We don't win awards. Guess what? Well, I won a number of awards for my comedy writing. So I had that, right? You can use any awards you've ever won, by the way. You can use your high school, art award. I believe me, I've packed, they said, just pile it with every award you've ever won. And I did. There is a guy named Barry. you guys know from the International Script Supervisors group, Barry Caldwell does these script supervision awards, which are not official, but if you were to look them up online, there's a location, I think in Pasadena, or it's near the Staples Center, where Barry does these script supervision awards, in which he honors script supervisors who have worked on award-winning projects. And I actually won one. And I did put it in my US work visa application. It went through. So like, this is hilarious. This is hilarious, but it's true. So I told Barry, I'm like, thank you for doing these script supervision awards, because it's searchable on the internet, and I included it in my work visa. I have something like, I don't know, 12 awards, like for different things, for doesn't matter, put it all in there. It's all entertainment related. I was a comedian. I'm a comedy writer. This is a funny thing that happened. The other, a very huge component of an international work visa package is press. So press, meaning articles, shows you appeared on TV, like Ryan, who's in our group today, is a master of press, right? I'm a master of press. I got a lot of press for my comedy, for my stand-up, but not really. How much press do we get for script supervision? I actually got press for my script supervision, by the way, and in some major enough publications. Anyway, they were processing my last O1 visa, which was for Paul Feig's series in North Carolina. It got shut down. I got my work visa, but then the whole production got shut down for the pandemic. It was for a show called This Country. And the lawyers called me. And by the way, there's a process to this. So if you are applying for an O1 visa and production agrees, production pays for it. Ideally, you can apply for your own and not tie it to one production, but ideally you don't pay a cent and production pays for your work visa. Very important point, because these work visas are expensive. If you don't go through one of the government programs for youth, which they'll cost something, but nothing like trying to get an O1, like an extraordinary alien visa. Those visas cost like 5 to 10 grand depending on your country's currency, and it's a lot. So get production to pay for it. So they said to me, oh, you don't have enough press. I was like, excuse me, I sent you 42 articles. I don't know any other script supervisor in the world who's got 42 articles of press. And they're like, oh, you did? We didn't get your email. So I resent it. And they were like, oh yeah, you have a lot of press. Yes, I've always, I don't know, because of my comedy side, I've always sought out press, and I've not really had a hard time getting press. Ryan said, if you're looking for PR, Sasha Stoltz PR, no matter where you are, I think she can help with this in an inexpensive price. Press should not really cost anything. I've never paid for press, but some people do pay for press. It's true. You can pay for press. I've never paid a dime for press, but listen, if you need press to put into your visa, paying for it is an option. Like, that's good. Whatever helps you get there. So yeah, in that package, you need education, awards, press, and letters of recommendation. So just keep tight with, by the way, you guys, I'm teaching a class at 2, so I got to get everything I want to say to you guys in, and have some time for questions. So I'll go faster. So press is press, awards, letters of recommendation, and get those letters from the highest people you can. I asked someone, I did a really terrible movie called The Craft Legacy, and really great producers, though. They were Oscar-winning producers. And I just asked one of them for a letter for Paul's show. And I didn't realize she was the head of the Producers Guild in America. So I had a letter from the head of the Producers Guild in America. I had a letter from Paul Feig. I had a letter from the showrunners of Suits. Like, you start to build up when you're a veteran. By the way, for an O2, you don't need that level of, you just need people in the business who know your work and can attest that you're a professional and good at your job. Okay, so that's about work visas. Once again, those are the hard ones to get, the O1s, the O2s, or you can go for the big, McGillicuddy, the green card, which I've never tried to do. That's expensive and it takes about 3 years, and you pay the 10 grand whether you get approved or not. So that's a lot. You can, yes, and Ryan says keep letters general to your character. That's true, but they do want, all the ones for my O1 very specifically were for that specific O1. So they would say, this is in support of Daniela Saioni's O1 application for this country, for this production company. It was for Lionsgate. So because the O1 and the O2 are tied to specific project, but the general letters for your character can help for the green card. Absolutely. Okay. So, so help them help you. Have these things standing by, have a current passport standing by, because often these opportunities come up at the last minute. one of my students, one of my non-union students in Toronto got a call on Monday to start a movie on Tuesday that was in Winnipeg, and he got on a plane on Friday. So he prepped in Toronto, and they shoot Monday. So that's how fast it happened. So have a good suitcase that is packed, have your kit. So my international kit is a little bit, it also includes a lot of the stuff that are in my regular kit, but help them help you by having your passport current, your vaccinations up to date, like whether it's COVID or any other, for India, I had to get malaria and all those other vaccinations that are required for that country. Production paid for them for India. Sometimes they don't. So like, just if you want to work in Thailand, get your vaccinations up to date for Thailand, for example. Okay. You can, what I failed to say was, if you're using the IMDb Pro method of finding work on IMDb Pro internationally, there's a function on there where you can search location. So you can search films in pre-production, production, and post-production. So obviously, and in development. So development might be too early because films get developed over 1 or 2 years. But you can check out what's in development and what's in pre-production, and you can search by location. So if you want to work in France, look at what's in development and in prep in France and see all the companies what projects they're doing. And if there's one you particularly want to work on, or if there's a company you particularly want to work with, shoot them an email. The email contact info is right there most of the time on IMDb Pro. So that's the modern equivalent of what I used to do in the 90s. Okay, so what's in my international kit? I have a good suitcase. I make sure that it conforms to international flight standards. So I have a good size carry-on that fits in there, and I usually have a bigger one because I bring my laptop stand with me usually wherever I go. I have all the plugs for international. I've worked on 4 continents, so you have a set of international plugs for your computer if you use a computer, or for your iPad charger. You don't need a transformer for those things. So a transformer actually transforms the power. Some appliances require that, but computers do not. iPhones do not. You just need the actual plug adapter that goes into the wall. Make sure you have that. Make sure you plugs, adapters. Oh, I have a portable printer. Canon makes a really great model of, and I have the old school version that plugs into the wall, but now they have a wireless version. Whether you get the wireless or the old school Canon, it's the smallest printer that I've seen out there. It costs about 400 Canadian, which is about 300 and something US. And the ink is not even as expensive as other printers. It's really, you can fit it in your suitcase and go. If you need to print stuff out, not everybody needs to print stuff out if they're fully digital, right? Or the production office can print stuff out for you. But I like to have it. I had an incident in the DR where my computer died from the humidity. So true story. Research the weather conditions in the country you're going to. In Morocco, sand killed my computer. Sand got into my computer. I didn't have enough protection around it. So I knew the second time going back to Morocco to bring protection for sand, because we shot in the desert. There's all kinds of, there's the sea, there's like, you can get sand from the beach in Morocco in your laptop. So in the DR, I had lost a computer to humidity. So there's ways to combat that. You can have like a fan, or there's ways to combat that. So keep, study what the weather conditions are going to be. Obviously in Canada, we have a lot of, I've had students work in the Arctic, and Simon's now in Winnipeg where it can get to -40 Celsius. So he bought like an insulator to go on top of his laptop stand for his computer. And I told him to be prepared for his computer to completely break down, which is why I always bring a portable printer, even if I'm working digitally, because in case of emergency, I will have to type stuff out by hand. Some countries, the production offices aren't as together, as full and complete and as ready to serve every crew member as they are in North America. So I used to have a portable scanner, which was this big. It was like like this. I could fit it in my suitcase. If I had to scan my handwritten notes in case of emergency, I think it was like $100. It's probably still on the market. So yeah, you don't have to have a full size printer or anything, but it's good to have that kind of stuff. Looking at the time, wow, I'm teaching a class in 9 minutes, my comedy writing class. So I know I got inspired to do this talk such last minute, and I had to squeeze it in. Okay, so I just want to make sure I haven't missed any points that I wanted to hit before I take general questions. Try to get production to pay for your visa. Have a kit that is international and is appropriate to the weather, warm, warm weather clothing, rain clothing. If you're working in Vancouver, find a way to cover your notes in the rain. I had a non-union student in Toronto who just got a gig in Vancouver. I'm waiting to hear her culture shock with the rain there. Okay, and then just quickly let you know what I negotiate for on an international production. All this, everyone who attended the negotiating your deal talk, it's all the same, but with a few extra things. So we negotiated daily per diem. So a daily amount of money that covers you being away from home. The standard in the United States is between $75 and $100 US a day per diem, depending on your region. In Canada, it's about 100 Canadian a day. And it varies. It might be 75 euro. It might be, it really depends on your region, but negotiate for a consistent daily rate for the money you're losing for being away from home. You got to pay your rent back home probably, or your mortgage. You've got to buy incidentals that you wouldn't have to buy if you were living at home. Negotiate for accommodation and be specific about the type of accommodation. Are you in a 5-star hotel? Very often you will be put up in a 4 or 5-star hotel. Are you by yourself? Most of the time you should have your own room as a key in a department, but make sure that's discussed. Do you have a driver or a car? I don't drive, so I always have to negotiate for a driver for transportation to and from set. And it's usually not a problem, but I do have to bring it up so they can plan for it. A translator if needed. I'll just ask if there's a translator. The movie Simon's doing in Winnipeg is half in Chinese and he does not speak Mandarin, and he had to ensure that there was a Mandarin speaking translator who was fluent in English to help him relay notes back and forth from the director and make any script changes. And finally, how you will be paid. This can get very complicated. So if you're based in Canada and you're working in Malta, for me, a lot when I work in Europe, it's through wire transfer, international wire transfer. And there are big fees, like every time they pay you. So how often will you get paid? If we're on a union contract in North America, and even if we're on a non-union contract, we're used to getting paid, weekly or bi-weekly at regular intervals according to our contracts with all the fringes. If you're international, you're probably on a flat rate and they're probably going to wire transfer you every week or 2 weeks. It's expensive for them, so sometimes they make the argument of every 2 weeks. Make sure they're paying the wire transfer fees, which can be like $30 every time, and make sure that you have all your banking information so that you can say, here's my, in Europe they call it an IBAN number, but in Canada we use SWIFT codes. Just make sure you have all the information for your banking to get paid in a timely manner. Okay, that was really fast and we have 6 more minutes, but does anyone have any questions of anything I haven't covered or anything that you're experiencing? Communication, Ryan says. Yes, well, you want to make sure, obviously, like the director whisperers know that communication is the crux of our position in any country, but also who our points of reference are to speak in English, who our points of reference are when we need a translator. Yes, absolutely. Just like you would on any other production, but in this case, I see what you're saying, like a cell phone. You might need to negotiate for a cell phone. Absolutely. How are you going to communicate with Post, right? They should pay for your cell phone costs. Yes. Wi-Fi Magic Jack. Oh yes, I used to carry a little internet hub stick. If production is not going to provide internet on set, and even if they are as a backup, I used to have like a little internet stick, the hubs that you can be in the middle of the desert and so hopefully still get an internet signal. And production should be paying for that as well. Yes, good point. Good point, Ryan. We have 5 minutes. Any questions? You can either unmute yourself and ask me live, or you can type it in the chat.
Yeah, I've been there. I was in Sri Lanka and we were being chased by 3 levels of government. And at one point I thought we were going to be killed. So I had to send out photos back home just so that at least I had a trail of information that my content was protected in some way, or some content was out, so that should anything happen, I have some evidence of where I was and what was happening.
That's great. Oh yeah, we were shot at in Malta, believe it or not. In a European country, the crew was shot at. But yeah, shit happens. I always say shit happens, right? And any level of filmmaking shit happens. But when you're international and you're not, like, you don't even know if you're protected. Like the Moroccan king in Morocco had full, he could say whatever, he would allow us to where to shoot, where not to shoot. We needed full-time diplomats on set with us, but they had absolute power. So do you have any
and the insurance as well? Insurance, you got to think of the insurance for any incidental, because you're not protected by any kind of workplace things that is inherent in your country. So you got to know what's happening out there too.
Yes, and if you're an IATSE member, you are covered for, even if it's not an IATSE show, you're covered for a certain amount of time. In ACTRA, it's 30 days, and I believe in IATSE, it's 3 months, but you would check with your union if you are covered under, even if your show, because IATSE is not everywhere in the world, even if your show is that, you could call your local and say, am I covered? And if not, do I need to buy insurance? Great point. Muri, do you have any tips to get more involved locally rather than internationally as a student? Muri, where are you locally? Because locally, it depends on your region. Yes, just let me know where you are in the world. Toronto. Oh, well, Toronto, we have a huge network of director whisperers in Toronto. We have dozens and dozens of, so I would say, who did you train with, Muri? Get like pro training, because I don't wish anyone competing with my students. I'm not saying that to be egotistical. My students are extremely well trained, and they're all over Toronto and all over Ontario. So if you're competing with them, you want to make sure that your training is on point, or that you have really huge contacts, like you have big enough contacts that they can, like with directors, that they'll hire you even without being one of, and I don't mean to, my students sometimes say, you're the mafia. I'm really not. But there are strong networks in place in our city, in Toronto. But if you're not, let's say you're not one of my students, you're not one of the director whisperers, and the course is about to go down on January 1st for 5 months. I'm not re-releasing it till May, and the price is going up to a normal price. Right now it's $497 US, which I get so much flack for that. And Liz, I keep trying to explain to my fellow script supervisors, it is a beta version of the course. I now know it works, so it's going up to a normal price. But if you're not one of my director whisperers, you want to get involved with the film co-ops, with the film schools, the CFC. Most of the productions the CFC does is with my students, because they will directly call me. Many local producers directly call me, but I'm not saying that you'll have to train with me in Toronto. There are people that haven't, but they have done it another way. So it depends on, I don't have enough time. You can email me and I can give you some suggestions, just because I have one more minute. Rosvita says absolutely right. Get in the course if you're not trained. Rosvita is in LA, where I also have a decent number of graduates there and growing. And the UK, I have a fair bit in the UK. Bianca, how much experience locally should you have to be considered for international gigs? It depends on your language and citizenship skills. Simon has been he's Winnipeg. It's not another country, but it could have easily been another country. It's been within 2 years. For me, it was within 3 years of my first job. It's not about the number of years. It's what you bring to the production, and are you willing and able to work? Sometimes they just want a warm body who's willing and able and has the basic training. Definitely, you have to be able to do the job, and that should be proven by a few credits. But I know people who worked with, for example, David Devine, with less credits than I had at that point, and I didn't have that many because this was 1996. So there was a big recession in film. I didn't do a lot of film work in my first years. LA, and just did my first breakdown for a UK gig. Yes, Rosvita is able to work in LA and the UK, where all the work is right now. So, oh my God, I have to go, you guys. I'm so sorry that it was cut so short. I had so much to say. Feel free, you know what, email me with your questions, because your questions are super valuable to me. This is going to be a whole chapter in the next upgrade of my course in May. So any questions you ask me will actually help me make my course better. So I fully appreciate it, and will answer them to the best of my ability. So Bianca, yeah, you can get a gig pretty early. Like, I know people who got their first gigs because they spoke Mandarin or they spoke Farsi. It's much more important to production that you can communicate. Oh, Patrick, you asked something. Sorry, you asked something further up, right? About New York. I would like to work in New York City. How much time does it take to get a work visa? If you're going for a green card, it takes 3 years. If you're going with a production, the O1 and the O2 take about 6 weeks. So if you're starting a production in Montreal, this is the fastest way you'll get to New York City, Patrick. Start a production in Montreal that's also shooting in New York, which happens, so that they will have to apply for a visa for you and pay for it. It takes 5 to 6 weeks. So have your ducks lined up in a row. Thank you, everyone. Everyone who was here and everyone who is not here is going to receive a replay. I have to go teach my comedy writing class, but thank you so much to everyone here. There's a lot of people here who are not director whisperers. Mariana is, some people are, but thank you you didn't know me and you came to join me for this chat. Have a great week.